Some interesting words from Mr. John Fury. He says that boxing fans are wrong to turn against Anthony Joshua, and he actually insists that the best is yet to come from AJ. So I'm going to be reading from a Daily Mail article. I'll leave it linked in the description box below in case you want to check out for yourself. It's not very long, but I'm just going to read some quotes from John Fury. So he says, listen, AJ's a great kid. Fans shouldn't be turning against him. And if they are, then it's wrong. AJ has given the public some great nights, and they should support the man. Let me tell you this. The best is yet to come from AJ. So the fans should get behind him, and let's get him back to winning ways again and make the super fight once Tyson is done with the Ukrainian rabbit. It's the biggest fight in boxing, absolutely. It's bigger than Usyk. Joshua and Tyson is still a great fight. So I urge fans, get behind the man. Don't kick him when he's down. And end quote. There are a couple more quotes where John Fury talks about the Jermaine Franklin fight. Doesn't really say anything that insightful, just says how Jermaine Franklin's a D-level fighter and how, the fight against Joshua and Franklin is a dud, stuff like that. But I find this to be interesting because obviously John Fury, the father of Tyson Fury, you'd expect him to not be as favourable towards Anthony Joshua. You wouldn't expect him to talk so positively, but I think there are a couple of ways of seeing this. I know there are going to be some cynical people who probably see this as John Fury bigging up Joshua because he still thinks that it's a realistic fight for Tyson and he wants to kind of still big Joshua up as a decent and good opponent and therefore potentially good win for Tyson Fury should they fight down the line. And I receive that point. That's understandable. But I tend to think that John Fury actually means this. I think he does genuinely think that Anthony Joshua still has some good days, maybe even his best days ahead of him. And I say that because I think it's a view that a lot of people have. I put up a poll a couple of weeks ago on my channel just asking the question, will Anthony Joshua be a world champion again, yes or no? And around 90 odd people voted and 80% of the votes were yes. So I know it's not a massive sample of people, but 80% of the people who answered do think that Anthony Joshua becomes a champion again. And so, what John Fury says here, maybe even it's his way of promoting it, like a fight down the line between Tyson and AJ, because obviously John Fury wants the best for his son. So if he bigs Anthony Joshua up as an opponent, he, potentially some people who view John Fury's opinion may also see Joshua as a high level opponent, be willing to pay for the fight. I don't know. This is, more of this cynical perspective, but John Fury does talk about how AJ has given the boxing public some great nights and that they should support him. And that's, that's an interesting point because there's this kind of theme, a common theme where people just completely trash AJ. And, at the end of the day, you're entitled to your own opinion, but it really only started to come when AJ was losing. There've always been critics of AJ. I'm not going to dispute that. But a lot of the unfair criticism of AJ came after the Ruiz fight, then after the Alexander Usyk fight, and now since losing to Usyk a second time, it's just been turned up to 11 and people they have no respect for Anthony Joshua. There's constantly ragging on him. And because of this, it's easy to forget that, a few years ago, Anthony Joshua was doing pay-per-views and they were getting millions of buys. And so, look, the pay-per-view buys aren't always indicative of how positively the British public see a fighter as and receive him as. But for the most part, it was in Anthony Joshua's case. People loved watching him. They, I mean, a lot of the casual fans, they loved Anthony Joshua's character, which was a little bit strange because he really didn't show much of his character. But for all intents and purposes, Anthony Joshua was selling out stadiums, doing massive pay-per-view numbers, and it's because people wanted to watch him because they enjoyed watching him. They thought he was great. But then as soon as he loses a couple of times to good fighters, oh no, Anthony Joshua's rubbish. He should call it a day. He should retire. He's done. He's only going to get battered and knocked out in any meaningful fight from this point onwards. And it just goes to show the reactionary nature of a lot of fans towards fighters. So, yeah, I tend to agree with John Fury. I do think potentially Joshua still has his best days ahead of him, because there was a point where I thought Joshua started to stagnate. I felt like his trajectory was starting to plateau a little bit. And that was all relative because, I used to watch him, especially around like the Dylan White time. So he was fighting Dylan White, Charles Martin, Dominic Brazil, Eric Molina. I thought Anthony Joshua was a decent fighter. I thought he was good. I didn't think he was anything special though, and I certainly didn't think he'd go on to do that many meaningful things in the division. But when it came to the Klitschko fight, obviously that was a big gamble because Joshua was so inexperienced. And yeah, Klitschko coming off of a long layoff, but Klitschko was probably the most experienced fighter in the division at that time. And it just seemed like a massive gamble, but Anthony Joshua really took his development to another level as an athlete and as a boxing technician. And from that point onwards, you could just see the very clear improvements in all of his fights. Sometimes he'd show different things, and I became more and more impressed. Very slowly but surely, I was like, Joshua is starting to become a real force. But then it got to around the point of the Andy Ruiz fights and onwards, when it just, I don't know, he seemed to stagnate a little bit. It seemed to go a little bit stale. And that was kind of made even more apparent by the fact that he was now in against some very good opposition. Andy Ruiz isn't just a fat Mexican. He's actually a very good fighter with some formidable strengths. And of course, Alexander Usyk, amazing talent, generational type fighter, already cemented his legacy as a cruiserweight, probably the best cruiserweight in history, and now doing great things at heavyweight. Losing to guys like that, there's no shame in that. But it did highlight that Anthony Joshua was maybe plateauing in the development. Whereas now he's clearly shaken things up, gone over to Derek James, based himself in the States, not just, okay, I'm working with Rob McCracken and then I'm going to add Angel Fernandez, but then I'm going to get rid of Rob McCracken, keep Adrian Fernandez, and then bring on Robert Garcia. That's not good enough. You're not going to get very far doing that. So I like what Joshua's done, where he's shaken things up and he's willing to go out of his comfort zone. The old saying is, nothing ventured, nothing gained. You have to kind of extend yourself a little bit, and that's what I feel Joshua's done. Doesn't mean it's going to guarantee that he comes back better than ever, or even as good as he was before. Doesn't guarantee that, but I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. And I think John Fury sees that, and I think a lot of objective boxing fans see that. So, hey, what we expect to happen, what we think is going to happen, doesn't mean it actually will. But, watch this space. All we can do is kind of sit back and find out. But yeah, let me know what you think of John Fury's comments here. He says that boxing fans shouldn't turn their back on Anthony Joshua because, he's given some great fight nights. He's had some very entertaining clashes with different fighters. And I know people are going to be in the comment section saying AJ's this and AJ's that, and he was never that good. But I'm sure a lot of you guys were the ones paying for the pay-per-view as well. So Anthony Joshua couldn't have been that bad if you were parting ways with your £20. And yeah, he obviously hopes that the fight with Tyson will happen, which, it's a big money spinner. I still think, Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk's a massive fight, a fight that we all really want to see. It's the most meaningful fight. But just because it's the most meaningful fight doesn't mean it's the biggest fight financially. I still think that Joshua versus Fury, or Fury versus Joshua, and Wilder versus Joshua, I still think those are bigger financial fights. And I, I think it will depend on how Joshua looks against Franklin, and obviously subsequent fights. But yeah, I'll leave it there for now. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you agree, disagree? Leave it down there and I'll get back to you. But for now, thanks for listening. I'll catch you in the next video.